All right, Chapter 11, Mendelian Patterns of Inheritance. In this chapter, we're going to talk about Gregor Mendel, Mendel's laws, Mendelian patterns of inheritance, and human disease, and then we're going to move beyond Mendelian inheritance. I will just put a disclaimer that a lot of this chapter is going to be focused on Punnett squares. I do not feel that I do an adequate job of explaining Punnett squares during this sort of this PowerPoint lecture, so we will for sure be covering Punnett squares in greater depth in our live lectures. So please make sure to attend those if you have any questions about Punnett squares, especially some of the Punnett square problems that you will be dealing with for our genetics labs. All right, starting off with Gregor Mendel. Genetics is going to be the study of both the stability of inheritance, so the fact that your parents are humans and so are you, and the study of variations that are produced in each generation of offspring. So prior to the work of the first true geneticist, Gregor Mendel, the concept of blended inheritance was already in place. And the concept of blended inheritance means that parents of contrasting appearance produce offspring of intermediate appearance, or the idea that if you bred a red flower with a white flower, you would always get a pink flower. However, this doesn't always pan out when every few generations bright red or pure white flowers were being produced. This was written off at the time as just being a facet of the instability of the genetic material. So this theory was popular and widely spread until the work of Gregor Mendel. He's sometimes referred to as the father of the modern genetics. His work did not agree with the blending concept of inheritance, so he proposed his own laws about genetic inheritance that we still use today. He proposed the law of particulate inheritance, or the idea that traits can be inherited in discrete units that we now call genes. He also fleshed out this idea with his laws of independent assortment and his law of segregation. Taken together, his theories can be summarized by saying that inheritance involves the reshuffling of genes from one generation to the next. So here's just a quick slide on Gregor Mendel, just so you're a little familiar with who he is. He was an Austrian monk. He studied science and mathematics at the University of Vienna, and he conducted breeding experiments with the garden pea Pisum sativum. There we go. And he very carefully gathered and documented mathematical data from his experiments. He formulated his fundamental laws of heredity in the early 1860s. I would like to point this out that this is a very long time before we had any concept of cells or chromosomes. He did not have a microscope. He had no idea of what these cells look or what these organisms look like on a microscopic level. All of his experiments on the inheritance of simple traits in the garden pea disproved the blending theory hypothesis. He did a fantastic work, and all of his work was based on math and stats. He was an excellent mathematician and statistician. So he began his earliest experiments and theorizing based off his work with a common garden pea. And he chose this subject for many reasons, not the least of which is that it's relatively easy to grow and cultivate. Number one, it has a very short generation span, so he could study multiple generations relatively quickly. Typically, these peas self-pollinate, so he could study purebred generations, but they are also capable of crossbreeding, so he could study the inheritance and blending of traits. All of this cross-pollinating had to be done by hand, so that way he could control which genes were getting integrated with which. At the time, there were true breeding varieties already available, meaning that they had been self-pollinated for so many generations that they always produced the exact same phenotype or the exact same appearance every single time, every single generation. He also chose them for their very simple objective traits. He studied their color or their size or their texture, things that were really obvious and binary. So seed shape, seed color, flower color, meaning there's always going to be one trait expressed over the other. There's never any blending of traits. So the flowers were either purple or white. That was it. Those are your only options. The seeds were green or yellow, and it was really obvious and very easy to differentiate the two. So that's sort of an overview of Mendel. Next, in our next section, we're going to break down some of his individual laws that he discussed.